Well, I think we'll make a start. Good morning, Admiral. Good morning, distinguished guests and participants, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, all of you, for joining us here this morning at the Museo de la Publicidad, which I hope you will all agree is an interesting and possibly appropriate choice of venue for today's event. Now, I am emphatically not a cyber expert, so from my point of view, it's really good news that we have such an impressive lineup of British and Portuguese expertise for today's discussions. And I certainly don't want to take up too much of your time at the beginning of the day. But before we move into the panel discussions, I wanted to take the opportunity to say a few words about why we have organised this seminar and why we think it matters. In December last year, the UK published its new National Cyber Strategy. And while it is, of course, a national strategy, we all know that cyberspace does not operate on a purely national basis. And I think there's a general agreement that we can only achieve a free, open, peaceful, and secure cyberspace that delivers prosperity for our citizens and our businesses if we work closely together with our international partners and allies. And for us, of course, that includes Portugal. And in fact, I wrote an article in Expresso in January, which was all about the UK's new whole-of-society approach to cyber and how it reflects the reach of cyberspace into our everyday lives. Now, I have to admit that we have struggled to come up with the perfect way to express the concept of the whole-of-society approach in the Portuguese language. And I still don't have a perfect translation to offer you. However, we have nevertheless used this idea as the central pillar of today's seminar, because the essence of that new UK approach, we believe, sits very well alongside what Portugal is trying to achieve. Not only with its own cyber security strategy, but also through its ambitious digitalisation agenda, building on the excellent technology infrastructure for which Portugal, and Lisbon in particular, is increasingly well known. But I won't say any more about the strategy because we have experts from London who can offer far more detail and insight than me into its content and the vision it inspired. What I can perhaps do is add a bit of context to explain why I think this is important here. Wherever I go in Portugal, I'm reminded in all sorts of ways that our two countries enjoy a very ancient friendship and alliance. And in fact, as most of you will be aware, it is in fact the oldest military and diplomatic alliance in the world that still exists today. And last weekend, I and many of my colleagues were in Braga, in the north, where in a very small village on the outskirts of the town of Vizela, we celebrated the actual 650th anniversary of the signing of the very first Anglo-Portuguese treaty. This was the first of a series of treaties, of which the most important was the Treaty of Windsor, signed by King John I of Portugal and King Richard II of England, which set the terms of an alliance which has been extremely important for both countries over the course of the last 6.5 centuries. What on earth does that have to do with cyber cooperation? Well, 1 month ago, I was in number 10 Downing Street for a meeting between the British and Portuguese Prime Ministers, at which they signed a new agreement, the UK-Portugal Joint Declaration on Bilateral Cooperation. And this new agreement is very much in the spirit of our ancient friendship and our ancient alliance. It recognises our shared history, it celebrates our enduring friendship. But most importantly, though, it sets a vision for the future of our relationship across a wide range of areas, including foreign policy, defence, security, trade, science, and people-to-people links. And crucially, in terms of what we're doing today, it includes a commitment from both governments, both sides, to enhance cooperation on cyber. So, today's event is really the first step in bringing that part of the agreement to life. But at the same time, I think it's important to note that we're not starting from scratch. Portugal and the UK are often like-minded in UN debates, we coordinate closely through NATO, we already have many business and science links in this area. There are lots of existing relationships and partnerships, many of them represented in this audience today, not only government to government, but also between businesses, academia, cyber practitioners, and private individuals. And each of these communities has a role to play in shaping the future of cyberspace. The themes of today's panels have been designed to focus on areas where we think we can learn from each other, where we can discuss and debate areas of shared interest, areas that can help us strengthen our cooperation and potentially lead us to new areas of collaboration. On each of the three panels, we will have some initial remarks from our speakers, discussion among the panelists, after which we will open up the discussion to the room and welcome questions from the audience. We're going to have to be fairly ruthless about timekeeping, so that means it's definitely time for me to stop talking. So I think without further ado, we will go straight into the first of this morning's panels, which is called The Global Picture and the UK Cyber Strategy, a snapshot of global cyber trends and an overview of the UK's new whole of society cyber strategy. At this point, I'm going to invite James Sullivan, who is the Cyber Director from the leading British think tank, the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, to lead off the discussion. So, thank you very much. James, over to you. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes, good. Bom dia a todos. I'm actually practicing my Portuguese as much as I can. I'm James Sullivan, I'm the Director of Cyber Research at RUSI. Yeah, better? Okay. I'm James Sullivan, I'm the Director of Cyber Research at RUSI, so a London-based think tank. What do we do at RUSI? So we conduct cyber security research, cyber policy research. We're a research-led institute. It needs to be evidence-based, but we can talk a bit about that later and why that's important in cyber. We look at national cyber strategies, look at cyber resilience and threat. And I'm sure in this room we've got people from all parts of the cyber community who look at all of those aspects. For the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about some trends in cyber. So before I do, I want to highlight why I think we're here. So technology is more embedded in our lives than ever before. I think we all know that. And we think it's a good thing. I think overwhelmingly a good thing. Apart from that my children are constantly on their iPad and I need to tell them to go to bed. And over the next decade, I think our digital identity is going to become our primary identity. And that's quite a scary thought, really. Here we are in person, but a lot of our identity is out there online. Someone just asked me what my Twitter handle was. That's a very important bit of information that I need to share. And our economies rely on technology. So when we talk about cyber, I think that's kind of not the full picture. We're talking about issues of privacy. We're talking about issues relating to prosperity. We're talking about issues of national security. So really, when we're speaking with politicians, with policymakers, practitioners, everyone should know about cyber. It's not a specialist topic. It's something that really is embedded in all our lives. So I'll touch upon a few trends that I've been seeing in my job, and let's see where we go from there. So I'll start by talking about ransomware. So the threat from ransomware and its impact on businesses and citizens remains a strategic priority. Very much so in the UK, it's a big problem. The criminals have got a near perfect business model going, really. So I think they can act with impunity. What a way to make some money. So you conduct an initial network intrusion, that might be through phishing and exploit. The RDP protocol is very much a point of entry, third parties, and then you can demand a ransom. It's a big business, it's a professional business. We've got some big examples of where ransomware has had an effect on us. The Irish healthcare system was down. I mean, that is a big impact on society. If people can't get access to healthcare, their records are unavailable. We saw the Colonial Pipeline attack in the US. Again, we're talking talking about fuel supply a lot at the moment in the context of the current global situation. There's another example where cyber attacks can compromise that. And then the whole country of Costa Rica was in meltdown because of a ransomware attack. So, I mean, this is a type of cybercrime that affects multiple sectors through to nations. And what have we seen? We've seen the use of publicly available tools developed by researchers and repurposed by criminals. We see ransomware as a service, so professional criminals are renting out their equipment for startups to take advantage. And a big question, and Shakespeare, to be or not to be. I think ransomware is to pay or not to pay. What do you do? Because a lot of people want to pay. What's the quickest way out of this? Pay up. Is that a good thing? There's a lot of lessons we can take from other areas there to do with kidnap. Do we pay kidnappers? I don't think we do. So what do we do with ransomware? And then there's the links to nation states, and this is fascinating. I think just shortly after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we saw a big leak of some chats, and these cyber criminals were really talking about their affiliation to certain states, threatening to launch cyber attacks in the name of a state, and things like that. So there's a lot of interesting aspects to the ransomware threat. So, onto Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the cyber dynamic. This is very interesting. Clearly, it's a horrific set of events that we've seen beyond cyber. I think we all condemn what's happening there. It's very sad. But in cyber, I think we see a lot of hyperbole. So we see use of the words cyber war, cybergeddon, cyber 9/11. I'm sure we've got lots more ways to sort of write those big headlines in the newspapers. And I don't think we should be encouraging that, because I don't think that is the true picture of what cyber and cybersecurity really is. Russia was never going to install a new government in Ukraine through cyber alone. But we've seen some incidents. We saw at the point of invasion, some satellite terminals stopped working. So what that meant was the aim here was to take out some modems and other communications at the point of invasion. That's very interesting to see the use of cyber at the point of an invasion. We've seen the use of wiper malware. So this was interestingly detected by the private sector. So that's an interesting point to take. This type of malware wiped systems in the financial sector, agriculture, emergency response, energy. So we don't really know the full picture of what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. But there's a lot of things that we can take from it that we could consider has Russia shown restraint, and that's why we haven't seen a lot of attacks. So maybe the deterrence model we've been using has worked. Maybe Russia's just been badly prepared, but this will be something that I think is something really important to monitor over the coming years about what really is going on there, because it's a fascinating case study for the use of cyber. State activity is another area. We've seen operations against solar winds, Microsoft and their customers. Rivals can sit inside networks, exploit vulnerabilities, they steal information. I think the key point here is what's happening as states are undermining our trust in our systems. And adversaries fought 0 days. We see North Korea using stolen cryptocurrency to fund their own state activity. And then finally, and I think this is important, I've mentioned China, I've mentioned Russia, I've mentioned North Korea. We need to look beyond the usual suspects as well. Other nations are advancing their own cyber capabilities too. We only have a surface level understanding of that, but it's only understandable that other nations will want these capabilities too. What is their doctrine? What sort of behaviours will they demonstrate? What sort of checks and balances will they have in place? And I think this is a big area for threat researchers over the coming years, which is to understand the capability of other nations beyond the usual suspects. My final trend that I'm going to pick up, I'm going to take it a bit wider now, and this is about advanced technology, our use of technology, the role of China in this. And I'll give you a bit of a crude split. So we talk about having a free, open, multi-stakeholder model to technology and internet governance versus another model of surveillance, of control, of having data sovereignty. Now, that split, it's not so binary. I think it's on a spectrum, and I think that's a very important way to look at it, and we should start to talk about that spectrum. But I think the big trend here is the era of the global internet and unified global technology. I think that's over. I think there is a split coming. And what we'll see are the development of core technologies, some in the West, some elsewhere. Where do we source our technology? We'll see fragile supply chains, semiconductor chips. Here we are, semiconductor chips in here, semiconductor chips in all of our devices. Where do we get them from? These supply chains are weak. They're unknowable. So how do we know where our tech is sourced? Who makes these chips? And also the role of standards bodies, which have become a tool of strategic power. So you have multilateral bodies, which are state-led. You have multi-stakeholder bodies, run by private sector companies, civil society, and then you have just de facto standards with national regulation, big tech. I think these are going to be a real focal point for future strategic competition. And it really is, it's not even about the tech, it's about the values, and it's a discussion over values in those bodies. And I think at the moment, there's not enough focus from all of us in those bodies about what's going on. Sometimes the discussions in them can be quite boring, but they're really important because it's about the values that we embed in our technology. So what do we do about that? We can't just say, well, don't use the technology of our adversaries. We've seen that with 5G, it doesn't work. Other countries are quite keen, in some ways it might be quite attractive for some countries to conduct surveillance on their citizens, to have control. So we need to be realistic about the appeal of hostile nations, and we need to devise our own ways to encourage other countries, those middle ground countries, to invest in our technology, in technology that we think holds our values. So, what does that mean to finish? This is why we need a whole of society approach. So I'm going to conclude by just some comments on why I think we do, and I think an important challenge here is, beyond the strapline, what does whole of society approach mean? What does it mean in English? What does it mean in Portuguese? What does it mean full stop? And I think what it means is that the levers that government have to deliver cyber security and resilience are limited. And I can say that I work at a think tank, so that's okay. But that's quite a revelation. We usually rely on government to fix things, don't we? But actually, and looking around this room and seeing people from multiple organisations, a lot of the levers sit in the private sector: incident response, threat intelligence, cyber insurance, third-party risk management. CNI is run by the private sector too. We've got partnerships with government and academia, capacity building. So, really, we're talking about a wide range of issues relating to education, industrial strategy, regulation and incentives. And I've talked a lot about hostile state activity. It's a matter of foreign policy. So we're in an era of geostrategic competition. So to close, I think that's what whole of society means. It's the very nature of the internet and cyber that most of the ability to affect change lies outside the hands of government. So I think the challenge today is to come up with ways we can make that a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James. Fascinating. I think in the space of a few very short minutes, you've given us a very vivid picture of the trends and the threats that we face, and then used that to make the case for the whole of society approach, which is a perfect segue, I think, into our next speaker, who is Holly Weldon from the Cabinet Office. I think he's going to talk to us a bit about the UK's national cyber strategy. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, guys. Good morning. It's fantastic to see you all here. I think it's actually really rare for us to have the opportunity to speak to so many different types of cyber leaders across government, industry, academia. In one room, I think is the perfect opportunity to have a kind of more detailed discussion about what the whole of society approach looks like in practice, and get a variety of voices and perspectives on what that looks like. So just to sort of introduce myself in more detail, so I'm Holly Weldon. I head up the Cabinet Office's work on international cybersecurity cybersecurity, as well as leading our modern deterrence program. So I actually work across both our work on cyber and state threats. And I played a kind of core role in developing the cyber strategy, so I led on the global leadership pillar. Please feel free to provide me with feedback in the networking break. I thought it was a huge opportunity to reflect once we sort of come to the end of the last cyber strategy. Cabinet Office's role is to develop cyber strategy as well as implement, oversee. I think it's a really important position to be in centre, to be able to look across government, to be able to identify gaps and opportunities, as well as being a kind of neutral partner in identifying where we can be more some of our parts, where we can maximise all of our levers, and how we can break down some of those silos. And that particularly applies between the kind of traditional security community, the economic community, as well as our operational community, and really maximise all of those levers. I think that is the kind of key to where we want to take the new cyber strategy. So the Cabinet Office was absolutely key, kind of making sure we had a clear, coherent vision. I think the first thing to know about the cyber strategy is that it flowed from the UK's integrated review. So this was the UK's grand strategy for foreign policy, security and economic policy, and the kind of philosophy behind that was we can no longer look at these things completely as an equation. There's so much overlap, both in terms of challenges and opportunities, and there's a need to kind of grip that across the board. I won't go through all the kind of geopolitical and security threats, because I think James has already done a really good job of doing that. But obviously there was a big kind of focus at the beginning and thinking about what are we actually responding to, what is the landscape that we need to respond to here. But I think the major sort of differentiation between the last strategy was the recognition of increased and diverse strategic competition between states, as well as the emerging threats and opportunities that come with new technological trends. I'm not going to go into all of the detail of the sort of 193-page cyber strategy document. Obviously, 4 key pillars, so strengthening the UK cyber ecosystem, taking the lead in technologies that are absolutely critical to our cyber power, UK global leadership and sort of advancing our influence, working with allies, as well as responding to cyber threat and improving our cyber resilience. What I'm going to do is talk you through the key, 3 key shifts in the way that we decide to sort of strategically frame the strategy, 3 key shifts in terms of how we thought about implementation and governance of the strategy, and then I'm going to sort of leave you on sort of 3 key priorities that UK has identified as part of sort of turning to implementation. So firstly, in terms of how we conceptualise the strategy, so 3 key things. Whole of society. Now, this is not a new concept for the UK by any stretch of the imagination, but it was something that we recognise we need to still really improve on. So I think James has already outlined a little bit on what we think whole of society means. So again, this is a recognition that cyber needs to be a team sport. Not all of the levers sit within government. This needs to be a partnership across government, academia, industry, wider civil society. And this is not just about responding to the threat. This is also about addressing the cyber skills gap. It's about building resilience. It's about operating overseas and building broader global capacity to respond. Then the second sort of major new concept that we were sort of introducing, that I hope you guys have picked up on it, but really welcome into reflections on this one, is the idea of responsible cyber power. So this is the UK's attempt to sort of demonstrate that we see major importance in demonstrating both to our citizens and to our global partners that in using all of our cyber-related capabilities, we are operating according to an ethical framework and within international law, and we want to build trust and transparency in the way we operate and the outcomes we're looking to achieve. And that's a kind of continued endeavour that we want to work on, we want to seek feedback on. Cyber power is not just about offensive cyber. So a lot of the time when we've been speaking to international partners about UK cyber power, I think the immediate reflection is we're talking about offensive cyber. It's not just about offensive cyber, it's not just about the threat. This is about using all of UK capabilities, skills, expertise to be a force for good in the world. And then I think the third major shift was pretty much in the direction of the strategy. So we are moving from a UK cybersecurity strategy to a UK cyber strategy. This was quite a deliberate word choice to demonstrate our interest in responding to both threats and opportunities, including contributing to digital growth, promoting diversity and inclusion, strengthening our democratic processes, projecting our values and human rights. Then some three shifts in terms of how we thought about actually implementing the strategy. So we gave a lot of thought to governance, so we really wanted to think about how we best orientate ourselves to deliver a genuinely cross-government approach. So we decided to appoint a lead cyber minister who sits within the Cabinet Office, with the purpose of overseeing the implementation of the cyber strategy, ensuring there's a genuinely coherent vision across government, but also making sure we are using all of our levers and genuinely working in partnership with whole society. So the moment we have set up this quarterly ministerial briefing with the cyber minister, where we bring together our intelligence community who provides briefings on the threat, as well as senior leaders across a variety of departments who help to explain the so what and what we're trying to achieve, and they're directly answerable to the cyber minister. And again, this is absolutely essential to delivering this coherent team effort across government. Secondly, we really want to think about how we intend to better clarify and empower departments across government to take leadership of delivering on the cyber strategy. And therefore, we decided to give particular departments more of a clear leadership role in delivering particular pillars. So, as a kind of obvious example, our front office leads the global leadership pillar. That doesn't mean the front office go off and deliver a game plan for delivering on that pillar alone. They're directly responsible for convening all government departments and agencies together to say, right, this is our vision, this is how we'd like to achieve it, these are our objectives. But how can we work together across government, maximising all of our levers to respond and deliver on these challenges and opportunities. It also enables more sort of active horizon scanning within those particular areas. Finally, a major sort of governance change, something we're really, really proud of within the UK, is setting up the new National Cyber Advisory Board. So this is a senior level board that will take sort of key members from across UK industry, academia, civil society, to deliver direct challenge to the government on our aims and how we're approaching and implementing that strategy, as well as helping us actually champion some of those aims within their sort of broader sectors. I think that's going to be absolutely essential to bring into the outside challenge that we just don't always naturally get within government. It's absolutely crucial and will hopefully help us sort of position ourselves to genuinely deliver a more partnership approach to this, rather than government just trying to dictate what we want to achieve and then expecting everyone to respond to that naturally. That board is something we're also looking to sort of drive international collaboration on. So they will be responsible for building big networks around all of our sort of aims and working with lots of different sectors internationally to think about best practice and how we deliver. So most recently we appointed a co-chair for that board, so Sharon Barber, who is the Chief Information Officer of Lloyds. We're currently just working through the process of appointing the other members of the board. But it's something we're really, really excited about, and we really, really welcome ideas for sort of key projects and research and international collaboration that we can use that board for. And we're really keen to see other supports that other countries have set up, again, to share best practice. So I think finally, just want to leave you with three major sort of policy priorities the UK has sort of identified for itself. So obviously, the strategy is incredibly broad and covers lots of areas, and everything is incredibly important. The three key things we really identified for ourselves that we really need to do quick work on to accelerate and improve. One is cyber skills. So we really drastically need to accelerate work in this space. We cannot live up to our vision for the UK as a cyber power without this future pipeline of cyber talent. And the kinds of work we're looking at in that space are targeted interventions to make sure there is an increase of studying IT at the age between 14 and 18. So really starting at a much younger age. Improving the sort of cyber profession within government. So we have a lot of generalists within government, and there is a need to make sure that if we are going to do this effectively, we need to raise the level of expertise within government, and that's something we really need to partner on with government and media. And also improving the vocation of and generally uplifting the quality of the cyber profession in the UK working with the Cyber Security Council. The two further priorities, one, quite obvious one, is resilience, so CNR resilience, supply chain resilience, improving our sort of mechanisms for instant response and early warning, again, something that absolutely is crucially not just a government endeavour. And finally, cyber deterrence. So this is about preventing malicious cyber activity before it actually happens. There is a strong recognition within government that once again, we need to do a much better job at utilising all of the levers available to us in an integrated way and develop a more proactive campaign approach to disrupting and deterring our cyber threat actors, and crucially working with broader international coalition partners. So that's something we definitely really want to work on more closely with Portugal. So I think that's hopefully a helpful overview of kind of where the UK is at the moment with the cyber strategy, but we'd be really keen to hear about how that matches Portugal's strategic priorities and your sort of overall passion on where you want to go next and opportunities for collaboration.
Thank you very much, Holly. That was great, and I think that at least goes some way towards answering the big question of James, which is what do we actually mean by a whole society approach, at least as far as implementing it across government. Very interesting, and you put a couple of questions out there at the end for our audience as well. We've got just a few minutes, I think, before we need to move on to the next panel, so I'd like to open the discussion up and invite questions from the audience, if you have questions. If you want to ask a question, perhaps you could just identify who you are. I'd be interested to know where the question is coming from. Who would like to put a question? Excellent. So we've got the Admiral in the front row. Perhaps we can get a microphone to you. It's coming. It's coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Antonio Marquez. I'm the DG of the National Security Office, where the Cybersecurity Center sits. I have two questions, one for James and another one for Holly. The one for James. Very recently, I was in a seminar, a little bit smaller than this one, and I heard something that struck me. And what I heard is that the most important critical infrastructure that the cyber community has to fight for or has to defend is democracy. Given the fact that you work in a think tank in a democratic country, and given the fact that only 37.8% of the 8 billion people in this world live in democracies, what are your comments on this one? Mr. Ambassador, should I throw the second one already? For Holly. Thank you for your explanation. I was a little bit confused with the fact that you said that now you have a cyber minister under the Prime Minister's Cabinet Office, but as far as I know, the Cybersecurity Centre of UK is part of GCHQ, which is in the MFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs structure. So how does the Cybersecurity Minister does what he has to do when his major tool is sitting in another area of the government?
I will do. Thank you, Alvaro, for that question. So, I wholeheartedly agree. I think democracy and values runs through everything. So, you talked about critical national infrastructure. When we're trying to protect elements of critical national infrastructure, and we're designing the technology that is going to advance our future critical national infrastructure. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot today, like what we mean by critical national infrastructure is changing dramatically by the day. It's not what we thought it was 20 years ago. So those values run through everything. So when we are designing our strategy, policy and governance, we need to think about our democratic values. When we are doing international capacity building, we need to think about our democratic values. When we're conducting cyber intelligence, we need to think about our democratic values. Because you need to practice what you preach. And I think we talked about that phrase, responsible cyber power. I'm going to broaden it out. So that cyber power, there are other nations who are cyber powers, but what they're not are responsible and democratic cyber powers. And I think that has to run through everything. So, I wholeheartedly agree with your statement, and I think that's what's really good about working at a think tank, is, I'm looking at technical, complex issues relating to cyber, but it really boils down to our core values, and that's really important.
Yeah, so on the cyber thing, we get asked a lot of questions about governance. It tends to be a real area of interest in countries. So it is still really early days in terms of having this cyber minister role, and I'm sure there'll be lots of teething problems to kind of differentiate responsibilities. But so in kind of really simplistic way, so their responsibility is to oversee the running and implementation of the cyber strategy and ensure that government is coming together collectively to kind of work together, maximise our levers, spotting gaps, allows businesses to kind of prod us and sort of make sure that we are focused on the right things and help set our priorities. Obviously, we all have limited resources as government, so it helps to get a really clear ministerial steer from the centre on where we want to prioritise those resources, and that applies to agencies, it applies to government departments. As you rightly said, so GCHQ is overseen by the Foreign Secretary, and NCC is part of that. That means that when the cyber minister, once things happen, he will direct the Foreign Secretary to respond to those requests. But NCC is a kind of technical advisory body as well, so it will take direction from these ministerial briefings in terms of kind of implementing of the strategy at the same time. So it sort of happens in parallel in reality. But yeah, to answer where it takes its most direct direction from the Foreign Secretary.
Thank you very much. Two excellent questions. Now, as always, I'm afraid time is not our friend, but we do, I think, have time to take perhaps one more question before we move on to the next panel. I see a hand up in the third row.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question. My name is Luis Antunes. I'm affiliated with the University of Portugal. Yes. So, James, I have a question that I'm throwing a bit more of complexity to the think tank. And what is your point of view of the big tech companies and the capability that they have in cyberspace? And in particular, I have this example of contact tracing apps that we had during COVID, where the UK and France, you wanted to have a centralized model for that to be the cooperation of the big tech, and they were not willing to cooperate and did not cooperate. So how do you see this new actors in cyberspace that have this huge amount of capability to interfere with decisions that were taken by democratic governments?
Right, what a question. The difficult question about big tech. So I think what you've done there with that question is we talk about responsible cyber power. Well, cyber power is not just with nations, is it? It's the big tech companies who have a lot of power. And you've talked about, the way that we, for want of a better word, monitored citizens during, the pandemic. So again, here we're talking about, those big tech companies demonstrating values which align with democracy as well. And I think, we've then got a decision to make. Can we develop incentives for those companies to use technology and rationalize data in a way that aligns with our values? And if they don't, then you turn to regulation. And I think that seems to be the direction we're going. I think regulation needs to be the lever of last resort, but I do think there is some worry. But I think to finish, I think what we're talking about again, we've talked to our whole of society again, that those big tech companies are very much part of that debate. And that's where we're going with this. It's the levers of power are spread across society, and big tech companies play a huge role in that, of course.
I think I might just add to that. I think this is actually a live debate within UK government at the moment. So, as we've said repeatedly so far, we want to be working in partnership with a variety of big industry players, and kind of big tech companies are absolutely front and centre of that. And we are thinking through what is it that we want to achieve with these organisations, what are the objectives. We've seen some of the major tech companies play a really significant role in Ukraine in terms of sharpening and understanding the threat picture, actually supporting Ukraine with their cybersecurity resilience, in some cases actually offering up pro bono services in a way that we haven't quite seen before. And there's a lot of discussion about how do we maintain our kind of enduring relationship with those kinds of organisations, but at the same time, we'll just work through what are the risks to some of this stuff. As we see certain organisations play more sort of state-like functions, some might observe. I think James has touched on we've got internet governance, governance of cyberspace. Again, this is something we are working on closely with industry. Multi-stakeholder model we're pushing, but at the same time, back of our minds thinking, what are some of the challenges around that? Recognizing these are governments, they're not accountable to citizens in the same way. And again, we are thinking through how do we respond to that? It's not something we necessarily have a comprehensive answer to at the moment, but it's something that we want to work on with our international partners to grapple on.
Thank you both very much. Thank you for the question. I'm afraid we're going to have to cut panel one to a conclusion at this point and move on to the second panel. So I'm sorry if you didn't get the chance to ask questions, but I'm sure in the course of discussions later this morning there will be an opportunity to come back to some of these issues. Thank you very much. Thank you to our two speakers, two panelists. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone. So from the person answering questions to the person asking questions, I prefer to ask questions. I think it's much easier. So thanks. So good. Welcome to the next panel. So for this panel, we're going to discuss cybersecurity and resilience. So we're going to discuss how to build prosperous societies. Some things I touched upon earlier. So how do we take the full advantage and benefits of technology whilst reducing the threats we face? So, as I said earlier, we all agree technology is a good thing, but there's clear risks to citizens, businesses. How do we further secure that online environment and give us confidence that our data is being protected? And I think that point of confidence and trust is very important across society. And I think citizens are kind of losing that trust a little bit. So joining me today, I've got an expert panel from Portugal and the UK. I've got Lino Santos in the middle here. He's the head of the Portuguese National Cybersecurity Centre and a member of the board of directors at NISA, the European Agency for Cybersecurity. Next to me, we have Amo Kala. Amo is the deputy head of cyber at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And he's also worked on a range of national security and crime policy issues for the UK government. And then on the end, we've got Sandro Mendonça. Sandro is an executive board member of ANACOM, which is the Portuguese Communications Authority. He's responsible for areas such as radio spectrum strategy, telecoms, postal regulation, submarine cables, and satellite-related economic activities. So when we talk about CNI, that's quite a list. So, in terms of format, we're going to start with an intervention from each panelist, and following those interventions, I might ask a couple of follow-up questions, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. I'm going to pass over to Lino, who's going to tell us about the Portuguese landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invitation to be here. I was asked to talk a little bit about our strategy as well. Our strategy is coming to an end, our actual strategy. It was published in 2018 and is strategy from 2018 to 2023. So next year we have to develop a new one. And of course, we have very good insights and ideas for the next strategy for Portugal. But I have to say that looking back to our strategy that was developed in 2018, we actually have the same concerns right now. So if we look at the strategical objectives that we had in 2018, they are mostly the priorities of the UK cyber strategy that was published last December. So we have to think differently and we have to do more to achieve these goals. We had three strategic objectives. The first one was to assure resilience. The second was to promote with a more economical point of view, so to promote innovation and the use of our technical abilities to secure cyberspace. And the third, and this is becoming a real issue all over Europe, to create and retain talent, and as was mentioned before. So this was defined in 2018, and I have to say it's still actual. We have the same problems. We have to actually improve our work in to achieve these three strategic objectives. The strategy then has 6 pillars, or 6 axes. One is regarding governance, the second is regarding education and training, the third, prevention, the fourth, reaction, and then we have 2 that are horizontal, which is research and development for cybersecurity, and of course cooperation, national and international. I think our strategy is already all of society's strategy for cybersecurity. That's why in Portugal, the Cybersecurity Center was put in the cabinet of the presidency of the Council of Ministers, and right now it was upgraded to the Prime Minister Cabinet and the Secretary of State for Digitalization. So it has a whole of government, at least, approach to cybersecurity, and I believe a whole of the society as well, because there are concerns regarding human rights and civil liberties that, well, are addressed as well in the cyber realm. Second thing I wanted to say is that strategies, Finnish colleague of mine once said that there are 4 maturity levels for national cyber strategies. Level 1 concerns the strategies that address awareness. The first strategy of every country actually works harder on awareness than other areas. The second maturity layer for the national cybersecurity strategies is about setting a governance model in the country. The third one is when we have a lot of government approach to cybersecurity. It's when the cybersecurity strategy addresses not only the security issues but also the economical issues, the civil liberty issues, etc. I think the Portugal strategy is a maturity level 3 strategy right now. But there is a 4th maturity level. And the 4th maturity level is when cybersecurity is embedded in all public policies. It's not a centralized strategy that actually addresses several domains of cybersecurity, but are individual strategies, sectorial strategies that actually embed cybersecurity in their thinking, in their goals, etc., etc. Of course, my Finnish colleague said Estonia was the only country in Europe that was a level 4 strategy. I hope we can get there. Anything for first?
Well, Matt, thank you very much. Excellent. So thank you very much. And Anna, we'll come to you for your comments.
Hello, I'm Nicola. I'm at the point in this seminar where most of my content has been delivered by others, so I'm going to throw away my script and basically talk to you about what I do, and then just try and segue between the Admiral's, I think, excellent question. In fact, the 2 questions, one on technology companies and one on national interest, because I have slightly different views from the independent think tank, but I'm sure they'll align in the end. So I look after the Foreign Office, I'm Deputy Head of Cyber, I look after strategy, network and communications for our Foreign Service on cyber. That is sort of delivered, as Holly said, through a network, hopefully trying to include somebody in this part of the world soon, Ambassador, but a network of sort of 30 officers brigading into a broader network of about 100 or so, who are our foot soldiers to deliver responsible cyber power overseas. And just following on from what Holly said, there are sort of 3 points, three sort of points that I wanted to make on. I think the bilateral and regional opportunity between the UK and Portugal. The first is to just try and bring one of the oldest alliances, as the ambassador set out, into one of the most modern alliances, right? And I think just on the question that the Admiral asked, I think the values piece around responsible democratic cyber power is important, but also if you look in the strategy, responsible democratic cyber power is talked about in terms of protecting and promoting your national interest in cyberspace. So whereas massive exposition of values and we work in a democracy, we must also not forget that China and Russia have a very significant national interest in cyberspace, and so therefore should the UK and our partners and friends like Portugal. So I wanted to be very honest about that point, that we're kind of in it for ourselves and in it for our partners, as well as creating the sort of multi-stakeholder, multifaceted approach that we want in the democratic society. The second point I wanted to make was to pick up responsible as having a broad responsibility towards
want partners and actually working together. And this is where I wanted to pick up that second question from the earlier panel on the role of technology companies. Now, I think there is an argument, isn't there, that technology companies exist in a Silicon Valley bubble, very highly paid, very cut off from the rest of the world. And I think, from a personal perspective, I have some sympathy with that view. But I do think, as James alluded to, they are sort of somewhat being marched into the 21st century, their responsibility, which they also have to protect citizens and to protect democracies. And there are two examples of that, actually, which I think Holly alluded to in the last panel. The first is the UK, though you probably heard in the news yesterday, it's probably going to be pushed through by our new Prime Minister, the Online Safety Bill, which looks at tackling harmful content in cyberspace, is very much an agreement, a global one, quite difficult to enforce, I would imagine, but a global agreement between technology companies and governments in how we disaggregate between perfectly democratic content and more harmful and abusive content, and then also a solution that's about to come down the line on end-to-end encryption, particularly involving one of the big technology companies, and how there is a potential solution that has really involved some neat technological solutions, but also good partnership working. But again, a collection of nations actually, trying to push a set of responsibility into these technology companies, many of whom are the size of small to medium states. So I want to pick up on those 2 points. And then finally, I'm very interested in what you said about moving from level 3 to level 4 in your national cyber strategy. I mean, I think for me, this relationship, I think, UK and Portugal, has got to be two-way. So I don't think I would assume automatically that the UK is at level 4 and is fully integrated. I think we can always learn from other nations, but also particularly from Portugal. I mean, a couple of things that I've picked up. It feels to me as though one of the things that we would look to you for is really how quickly you have gripped the risk. Significant uptake, about 80% of cyber attacks throughout the COVID period. But even though you worked sort of year 3 to 4 of your strategy, actually, in all the discussions I've had, it feels to me as though that grip of sort of CNI, that bringing the private sector into your solutions has been delivered very well. I think one of the risks that Holly picked up in her piece was that perhaps on the skills and the industry side, one of our ambitions is to be integrated, and I see that integration here, and I think that's very welcome. And the other thing is, the sort of 25% of your recovery investment that you put into properly secure digital transformation, I think is excellent, right? I think if this is to be a genuine two-way relationship, and the more that you can tell us about how you've delivered that, I think would be really good. Where I'd like you to lean in a bit more, I think, is really on, again, we sort of picked up earlier on, the sort of UN and ITU and other processes. ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, being the new arena of geostrategic competition, with China in particular. We are running quite a concerted campaign for the UK candidate for the ITU Council. We welcome your support on that, because as a responsible cyber power, responsible democratic cyber power, bringing our Portuguese friends and diplomats along with us, and your sort of society along with us, into these multilateral fora, I think is really important. And then finally, for me, it is the whole of society. There's an element of this which remains to me actually the whole of government as well. And I look at our own system, and it is integrated. I mean, the Admiral picked up the point that there is this slight oddity that the Foreign Secretary oversees GCHQ and therefore the NCSC, but actually some of the levers are increasing, are in the Cabinet Office. That works most of the time, but that I think there are silos in any system, and so I think if we could learn from you about your next cyber strategy and how you want to sort of ensure that those silos don't exist, I think it'd be very interesting. So for me, there is a lot in responsible democratic cyberpower, which is about a responsibility to both protect and promote a national interest in cyberspace, to sort out the resilience, to deal with the skills gap. But from the sort of a rather esoteric Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office perspective, it's also to work in partnership with our Portuguese friends and make sure that integration means that we can stand up to some of this geostrategic competition, but also risks that are inevitable in this space. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you for that. Very wide-ranging. Sandra, I'm going to pass over to you for your comments. Thank you.
James, I'd like to thank the Embassy for this invitation, for this opportunity to have the regulator to convey voice and perspective coming from this particular independent actor in the broader ecosystem. James, you asked me to really focus on our concerns and those topical issues on our agenda, and I will underscore three topics. So, for sure, James, you were thinking about 5G as one of them. The rollout of 5G system is going on well in Portugal, current year, and we have been happy with the outcome, although the process was hard-going. The 5G infrastructure is deployed by the operators, and we know some things about 5G. One is that it's very critical in terms of the new ways to ensure synchronism in the network, making it particularly sensitive to very local matters of interference. This may sound a bit esoteric, but this will lead us to a view that geographically rooted security issues are key in this new system. Another thing is that given recent experience, we have been more appreciative of the value of technological diversity in what connectivity is concerned. There are many generations of telecoms, wireless telecoms in use, and they have different levels of exposure to threats or to incidents. So technological diversity is giving you a notion that having a robust connectivity setup is contingent on the design and the heterogeneity of the technological base. To add another point related to 5G, and this has to do with technological diplomacy in arenas like standardization bodies or international organizations. And I would like to underscore that undermining what have been international common goods is actually not good for the long-term security of us all living in one planet. So if we refer to values, we should also have in our basket values like fairness or inclusion of many things. Topic number 2 has to be our dearest topic of submarine cables. Here in Portugal, we have been pushing for the renewal of our own system in the Atlantic, connecting the continent, well, the mainland here with the source of data. So this new infrastructure, which is spanning, well, we have tectonic plates, we have lots of distance, we have 2 islands in the Azores that are on the American plate, and there is an African plate, so we have a really intercontinental country, and we have to deal with that. The opportunity is such that we want to have a multi-purpose cable system that would allow us for scientific monitoring and reliable telecommunications. If you connect the first letters, then this gives you a smart cable system approach, scientific monitoring and reliable telecommunications. Since we have environmental challenges today, we have a massive risk of earthquakes. One of them in 1755 really changed the configuration of Lisbon. And we need to take into account the risks of nature, but also having the opportunity to deliver back to the international community what is common good, which is knowledge about environment and climate change. Of course, because we have new data coming out of submarine cables, they are not just transport devices, they are generating devices of data. We need to talk about data governance issues, and this will be very important for us in the submarine cable agenda. Finally, because the ambassador was talking about how to translate all of society approach, I have my own take on that, and the way I address it is to talk about cibersegurança societal, and we having societal cybersecurity view that is necessarily a holistic view. And from a regulatory standpoint, let me narrow down what it means. It means that we already have a network of regulators in Portugal, for which we have an English name to make it cosmopolitan enough so that we can bring other regulators from outside the country, but the regulators in communications have something in common with regulators in energy, since these are network industries, and disruption in one will lead to disruption in the other. But of course we are fortunate enough to have regulators like the water regulator in Portugal, and they are very good actually in this whole notion of cybersecurity, multi-point, and having varieties of technologies embedded in their own infrastructure. So for us, this is a major thing that we are able to have a dialogue among regulators, and this is compounding the very good relationship, umbilical relationship we have with the Office for National Security or with our Office for Cybersecurity, which is actually for us the bedrock of our confidence in what we do, the way we talk with each other, in which we co-develop knowledge together. So this is core to have cooperation among the institutions that have this aim, this ideal to serve the people, to serve this country, and to serve the international
Really good. Thank you for your remarks. So we've got about half an hour left. I'm just going to ask the panelists some questions that I've been scribbling down, if I may, and then we'll go to the floor. Sandra, if I may come back to you first. So I'm very interested, you picked up on that point on vendor diversity and how you deal with that risk management. You touched upon submarine cables, and I imagine there are a lot of patents around those, and certain organisations that may have trouble. How do you deal with that issue of vendor diversity? And if you've got a few providers for a certain product, how do you risk manage that? And linked to that, what do you think comprises critical national infrastructure in this day and age?
Thank you for the edgy question. As you know from your own experience in the UK, regulators have a limited mandate in the security realm. The term I used was actually technology diversity, not vendor diversity. Because if we have to deal with the vendor diversity, James, we have to deal with the big tech. We cannot separate the hard tech from the software virtualization and the digital media sphere. So, if in the UK you talk about vendor diversity, for instance, and you are not the only one, the Germans have been talking about that, I would expect you to develop the conversation to the point of the big tech. Since there we have monopoly issues to deal with, and the CMA, which is the antitrust authority in the UK, has to deal with these challenges at all. Since now we have a new era in which these digital powers, these large megapoles, are really much more knowledgeable about our lives than national governments, and they are not accountable to democratic institutions. They are not regulated. Yeah. So that would be my edge answer to your edge question. Regarding standards, this is definitely a major issue because now we are up in the value chain. We are now at the knowledge component of the value chain, where you design the next generation, 5G, is being deployed, not finished. The research at the academic level is still developing, but we are already having 6G building up. And we don't know how will be the final configuration, but we know that many countries are contributing to the technological frontier in 6G. So the West has not been used to having a plurality of actors, global actors, contributing to the technological frontier. Probably the West has to wake up to the 21st century, I would say. And we have a plurality of players that have been actually pushing innovation in 5G more than 4G. And we have also to see how this common pool of knowledge is integrated. Since this integration is something that we have not mapped, fully mapped, yet in terms of consequences.
Thank you for those very interesting remarks. I'm going to work my way down. I'll work my way to Lima now. So I was very interested in the 4 levels and how you talked about cyber being embedded in all public policy. And I'm going to take you to Portugal's international role in cyber, because that's going to be part of it as well, foreign policy. And my question is, what unique opportunities does being a Lusophone country provide Portugal in cyber? And how do you see Portugal's international role in cyber?
Well, I'm not the right guy to ask that question. You have Ambassador Sousa in the back and can answer an accurate answer for that. But Portugal is a small country, even in Europe. So in the whole picture of this technology and these barriers that are starting to develop around some countries, around some regions, Europe, for instance, has some RGPDs, and is a very good example how we are actually making a vast Portugal can do it alone. That's my perspective. We have to work together, like-minded countries, as you said, have to work together to actually ensure that our values remain intact and are actually enforced technology in a globalized economy. So that's a huge challenge. We have the problem of that transportation between the US and Europe. We have to deal with that. We have to fix it. So we have to work together with like-minded countries and actually assure that we have a global market working and at the same time assure our values within our assure sovereignty within our country. So that's a huge challenge. But I'm not the right person to
I think it was a good answer. Ambassador, do you have any views on that question? I think it's time. Please, could someone get the ambassador a microphone?
Well, thank you very much, Lynn, for this track. I was hiding behind in order to avoid it. Well, actually, we have been mainstreaming cybersecurity in our aid programs. We have only official aid programs with Portuguese-speaking African countries and with Timor-Leste in Asia. So we have only 6 aid programs, national aid programs. And we have been gradually, because these programs, they run for 3 years, and so as they come to their completion, we have been introducing cybersecurity as a central concern. So, but I cannot hide that other countries have been very active also with Portuguese-speaking African countries, not only China but also, Russia and so on. So we do have a sort of muddled landscape now in those countries. So we do have to be more focused in what we are doing in that respect. And certainly this is a field where cooperation with the United Kingdom would be most welcome for obvious reasons. Thank you.
Many thanks for that intervention, extremely interesting. And just my last question before I come to Q&A, I'm going to go to Alan. And we talked a bit about, the role in standards bodies. Just a question on what a future diplomat looks like. What's a tech diplomat? How when you're thinking ahead, 10, 20 years, what does the next, the next cohort of diplomats look like?
I think it's a really good question. Thank you, Ambassador, for your input into the last report. Really interesting question. I think, again, Chris started his speech at the beginning with, I'm not a cyber expert. None of us who work in the Foreign Office or the Cabinet Office or anywhere expect to be cyber experts. Indeed, it's probably better when more effective diplomats and interlocutors, because the technical advice is given elsewhere. It's given by National Cyber Security Centre, by our SIGINT agency, GCHQ, and then, of course, the really strong domestic cybersecurity industry as well, which I'm very keen through our DIT team here, partners with Portugal's own set of experts. But on what a future diplomat looks like, this is a really live challenge, I think, at the moment. Cyber diplomacy is the future of diplomacy. It is a question that we're grappling with in our foreign service. How do we mainstream cyber, digital technology across our overseas network, right? I think from a personal perspective, what that looks like, or some of the solutions are going to be, again, these aren't off the ground yet, but an integrated capability development program, so that, like our ambassador here,
an ambassador in a Portuguese-speaking country can go in and pitch cyber, digital and tech in the same way that they can trade and human rights. And we're actually probably not as close at a global level as I'd like us to be. So we are investing quite hard in the cyber skills and knowledge, including some support from the NCSC and others. I think the second thing is really looking at the sort of, is basically looking at that beyond the sort of the technical advice, looking at where the sort of national interest again continues to come through. And I think that is some of the sort of harder edge stuff that I think I've tried to pick up in my couple of interventions today. That yes, we are driven by values, and yes, we work across partnerships through a values lens, but the UK and hopefully Portugal jointly will also have a collective interest in ensuring that the Chinese don't do tied investment in bits of Africa that comes with strings attached, and the Russians don't lobby, as they do successfully, I would say, in the UN against a cybercrime treaty. So, I'd expect our future cyber diplomats to be brilliant diplomats, to have an understanding, although not be experts on some of the technical underpinnings, because that can be provided elsewhere, but also enter some really adult discussions with that notion of responsible cybercrime, but also national interest at the centre of what they do. I suppose just a final thing on this, the UK government is about to launch an international technology strategy. So that will then mean that we've got a critical international technology strategy alongside a cyber strategy. Clearly, the international elements of delivering that technology strategy are being thought through. We have a model in that we have a technology envoy in San Francisco, Joe White, who's also the Consul General San Francisco. So one of the things that you might find in the future is dotted around the world an integrated sort of cyber critical tech network with its sort of, with the set of skills that will require. And I'd love one of those jobs, so if there's one coming, you'll see me in mind.
Very good. Maybe the diplomats as well need to get used to conducting diplomacy in the metaverse, but let's not go there. Right. Excellent. We've got some good time for some Q&A now, so we'll move to that. If you could just state your name, your organisation, and whether your question's directed at a specific person or the whole panel. So please do fire away at the panel. Yes, this gentleman there.
Hi, my name is Shukman Martins. I'm from the University of Portugal. So I think congrats to the panel because it touched all the critical subjects in this matter. My question is, since all the data mostly goes to the cloud, should we rely on non-European companies, aka big tech, to provide us cloud computing? Or should we push for a more decentralized that actually makes, orchestrates the capability that we already have in Europe and probably incentivize more? Okay? And the question is brought to the panel.
I can start because I picked up the subject, so I'm responsible for this question. We have a law that we are obliged to. So companies are obliged to this law. We have the shrimps according from the European Supreme Court, and we have to actually define a new cyber shield between the US and Europe to actually address these shrimps according from the European Supreme Court. So yes, we have a problem. Yes, we are trying to fix it, and we have to fix it.
I just want to talk very quickly. So we are definitely interested in this mainland European conundrum, I think, in many ways, and I don't think being outside of the EU has made much difference in our approach. For me, the biggest question is that we call them MSPs, so managed service providers are actually a pretty critical part of our risk nationally. on CNI, and that demonstrates that actually CNI is already pretty decentralized, I think. So, many of the UK's managed service providers are in India, and when we mapped our CNI risk, we found that there's a particular set of issues in India that we need to look at. So, and that, for me, it's just very simply a question around balancing market opportunity, market diversity, monopolies, and then how you're going to address your risk. The UK doesn't have an answer, but I think we're very interested in the way that our Portuguese friends and others will deal with this issue.
Thank you. Now I'm going to address this matter in the following way. I'm going to say that during the Portuguese presidency of the EU, there was some bunch of themes put on the table, and the fingerprints of I'm going to say as well. The idea was to refer to European data gateways, because if we think about connectivity, go again to the issue of submarine cables, you have these infrastructures, and when they land, they don't land just like the old days. House, connect the land network, you have data centers. And the data centers are a specific service generating compound. So when we have the data being localized, because they are not just intentional, they are localized somewhere, the cloud exists. And not to have these European data in the European perimeter, let's say, is what? It's a source of potential supply distress in the future and a major source of strategic dependence regarding foreign powers. And as Lima said, Portugal is small enough that it cannot be arrogant. It has to have a cooperative attitude in many geographies. As I said, Portugal is more than European, which is the Americas. So hopefully this view, this multidisciplinary view, is informing our pathway. Yeah. But the matter is, I'd like to say that supply chain distress potential and strategic dependence in the informational age.
Fabulous, thank you to everyone. Any more questions, please?
Morning, I am Philip Mings. I am a co-founder of the Center for Cooperation in Cyberspace. We are an NGO. We are actually the only Portuguese NGO accredited by the UN to participate in the UN Cyber Convention, Cybercrime Convention that you just referred. And besides, what we are, this is interesting because we've been talking a lot about foreign powers influencing the global south, and exactly we are a network of think tanks, NGOs and universities from the global south, namely Latin America and African countries. So of course we are very like-minded, we are apolitical, but of course our pool of values is pretty much the Western one, and we do believe and we do feel that we are losing ground every day, and we are losing ground to our strategic rivals. Let's just do not forget that since the war in Ukraine started, how Russia has been doubling down on weaponizing the BRICS as an organization against the West, let's say. You've probably seen the China data breach from last weekend, the Shanghai police data breach, the largest in their history. Do you believe, and the question is for the whole panel, do you believe that this will serve as an accelerator, as an excuse, as an opportunity for China to double down and accelerate their efforts from private sector and start developing more public cloud servers, providers, infrastructure that they can fully control? What do you think?
Thank you
firstly, thank you for all the great work that you do. I think it is a great benefit to the UN processes in both in cybercrime and more broadly in the ad hoc meeting on cybercrime, but also the first committee where we lobby on some of the application of international law to have the multi-stakeholder approach. I think it works really well. I'm sure you're involved in the open-ended working group as well. And again, that really does make a difference to diversity and inclusion, but also just a range of viewpoints to try and counter the Russian particular narrative which seeks to bifurcate the internet and essentially using it as a tool of strategic domestic and wider control. So really great work there. I think on your question, I'm not sure that China really cares about the data breach, actually. I think their approach, both in terms of deterrence and the way that they have conducted cyber attacks throughout the last 10, 12 years, has always been very little acceptance or understanding of collateral damage, and a kind of a system that is very wanton in terms of spreading cyber attacks and constantly looking at chinks. So I think there's that point. I think in terms of whether it will lead to a sort of divorce from the private sector, I suppose I kind of flip that round and say probably, because I think the Chinese government's continued intentions remain wanting to aggregate as much sort of data as they can domestically. I don't think that Chinese technology companies really, it's a terrible choice of phrase, but have the backbone or indeed the levers to stand up to what is an increasing level of state control over not just Chinese tech, and you will have seen the examples of Chinese tech billionaires, kind of having a bit of a sort of merry-go-round into custody and into prisons and back. So I think in many ways this is a really interesting litmus test. I'm not quite sure how the Chinese government has responded at the moment. I think they just haven't, have they? It's just a sort of a denial that this has happened. I think it was. If you read into and I suppose it's part of the facade has come away, right? That somebody can so easily just exfiltrate that level of. It wasn't really a hacker either. It was just somebody who found this vulnerability, and so their response will be very interesting. I have no further insights than I'll be as interested as you are, but frankly, given their experience, the experience we have, we don't get to go in to talk to the Chinese that often on sort of issues of cyber governance. So in your field, we'd like to do that more. I know that at the UN that they tabled a sort of data security resolution, which relatively recently, which didn't win much backing. So again, perhaps this recent incident demonstrates how, it demonstrates a bit of a risk for them, because they're going hard at you on data security and there's a massive breach in Shanghai, doesn't quite fit. And that's the sort of thing that we quite like to happen more often, so it demonstrates the limit to that, to that basically state-led approach, I think. I hope that's helpful.
I don't have much to add, but attention they probably don't care, but they will probably do something. They can do something in a technological way, change the architecture, maybe close themselves more. I don't know, that's speculation, but they probably do something to secure their own data.
Thank you. Another question about Alpha. So we have been talking about silos and different splits of the internet and so on. This is not exactly the internet we dreamed about in the past. So what do you think are the implications of this in practical terms for the citizens who want to communicate in terms of worldwide or for business, in terms of management of the supply chain and so on. What is exactly the implications of the split of the internet? I don't know who has an answer to this. On the second level, so we were talking also about protocol standards and so on. How do you see this split going? Do you see other blocks, other regions develop their own protocols, IP protocols, not exactly under the ICANN, for example, framework? How do you see in terms of these practical developments at technical level? Thank you very much.
So a question on how we deal with this inevitable split, I think. So who would like to start?
This question to us all. I don't have much to say regarding the internet since the digital mandate of regulator like Anacom is limited. Regulators have been inspired of the challenges, but having them often is a bit different from us, so they don't deal with something able to deal. But they deal with online harms and we don't. Well, regarding the internet governance, this is still not addressed at a very political level. Every country has different bodies of government addressing that issue. But I think, as you said, the intensity and temperature at the International Telecommunications Union will rise. Hopefully, the further step will not be total disruption of these institutions that have served well after the Second World War. And I think that we still are in the post-war mode. We still are in the post-war mode. And you see who are countries in the Security Council, including China, a country that realized was also a winner of the Second World War. So the patterns in time are strange. They are in cycles. Regarding the internet, I think we will have more to say in the future. Well, we, as in a particular type of regulator, since we have at the European level association of telecom regulators, which of this part of, and the component of our agenda for digital is growing, and the opinions of digital classification governance structure. Not much to say, but we still have this form of the internet.
Very good, thank you. And Lina, just to pick on that, as we're a National Cybersecurity Centre, how do you plan for that? A future where people are drawing upon technology, that's made differently depending upon, our values and, products that, some are safe, some are not, and how do you strategically plan for that when there's such a split?
Well, I think it's inevitable. There's a good book that answers this question. It's called Net Delusion. Net Delusion from Evgeny Morozov. It's a very good book on, the end of the cyber utopia from the 90s. But I don't want to see this as a bad thing. I don't believe that we will actually have different parts of the internet with different protocols, with different stacks from engineering perspective. We'll always have an internet, we'll always have global communications. We will have parts where we enforce our values. This means that it's not the World Wide West, but we actually are able to enforce our values. So, for sells a book, let's call it Lady Shackleton's Lover from P.H. Lawrence. But the actual sale of this book from a store in New York is a crime in Singapore, probably not why. It violates the proprietary law in England, of course, and the consumers law in France. This should be actually a good thing to have a book selling in New York actually being a crime in 3 different places of the world. Of course not. We have to enforce our laws. So this is a good thing to be able to enforce the laws on technology. But we have to work in like-minded countries to actually have a coherent approach to this, or else this would be country by country. And this is not a good thing. So let me put it this way: let's not look at it as a bad thing, but we have to work to actually enforce our values, enforce our law. This is also for anything, and at the same time ensure that we have an open market and we can work together without like-minded countries at least.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I mean, I think this notion of sovereignty is going to increasingly become an issue. I think there's kind of so much at stake here. It's quite difficult to get into your head. I mean, I think one, that a split internet is probably likely. I don't think it's around the corner. I think it's, and I do think there's a window of opportunity, as says to. As responsible cyber powers to actually try and develop some of the coherence and some of the international frameworks around, data and around, I don't know, whatever the elements are to head some of this stuff off. I think what we have to have in the back of our minds in those groupings is often what our friend from the NGO will see at the Ad Hoc Committee on Cybercrime, right? Which is a very sophisticated Russian narrative, which is basically, in international cyber diplomacy, there are 150 middle ground countries that's the arena of debate and discussion. An increasing number of them are drawn, not least in as the ambassador said, in sort of Portuguese speaking bits of Africa, into this narrative that the Russians are espousing, which is, turn your internet off from the rest of the world, make it slower, and therefore you'll never get political dissent. Oh, by the way, we'll localize your data and give law enforcement that benefits, and by the way, these big companies can sell their stuff, and it won't be impacted by global competition. That's a fairly seductive narrative, right? I mean, I think, and so I think, despite my positivity, I think it is for all of us, including the UK and Portugal, working closely at the UN with our friends across civil societies to just present that vision, try and make that vision real and tangible to bits of our government and to our populations. And I think unless we do that, we will sleepwalk into these different manifestations of cyberspace, which I don't think is healthy, particularly. And if it's inevitable, it's inevitable. Just on the point around separate internet protocols, I mean, I think that's also inevitable in the sense that, as China did recently through ICANN, one of the committees, trying to at least seed a sort of a separate sort of system of registering domains and things like that. Again, forgive my ignorance on the technicalities, but again, I think those skirmishes will happen. But if we have a shared understanding of the fact that we don't want the Russian model, we don't particularly want the Chinese model, the Chinese model is far less sophisticated in terms of a narrative, then actually I think we will ultimately get to a happy medium, which is likely to be coherent. And perhaps different parts of the world will have different technologies based on values. They kind of already do. So, I was posted last in India. In India, there are lots of apps which will take your personal data, by default and pretty much do whatever they want to it. And that's not something that we would accept in Europe, right? So I think some of this is already there, some of it, but the solution is in UK, Portugal, others actually really kind of working quite closely together, both here but also at the multilateral forum.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, we're at time now. I think that just shows, you know, we're meant to have a discussion on cybersecurity, and we've discussed future technology, we've discussed national security, foreign policy, so you know, this impacts all of us. It's not just about cyber specialists. So, yeah, we're at time. I just thought I'd say obrigado pela sua atenção e que vocês tenham bom dia. Thank you.
Muito bom dia a todos. Good morning to you all. Let's start the third panel of the day. We have with us guests coming from Portugal and of course coming from the UK. Let me start with Catarina Sommer from the NCC group, also David Gray from Clarinet, also Lisa Tunes from the University of Porto, Keith Martin from the Royal Holloway University of London, and also another Catarina. She's Katharina, she's Catarina, so Catarina Bates from Demos.pt. They will be with us for the next hour. And let me start by saying that, well, of course the event is about, people are saying that cybersecurity, no, it's about cyber and how to evolve all the society. I want to bring back for this specific panel that concept. And also tell you that, well, the pandemic, especially the several lockdowns, that at least in Portugal we had 6 lockdowns. It became very clear that for all of us, the way we now work, learn, shop, interact with others, interact with whenever we need to have a consultation, medical consultation, or whenever we need to access a public service or buy something through the internet or even interact with public services, it's now completely dependent on digital. And that became a reality for parts of the population that never understood that before or never really gave the value to it. We had, before the pandemic in Portugal, 22% of the population that never used the internet. Now it's 16%. So a big decrease. So these are people that never use the internet, now have to deal with passwords, understand what's phishing, what's cybercrime, etc. But the same thing happened with smaller companies that during the lockdown had to start dealing with online, have a digital presence, that's to start selling. So how do they do this and be secure and have infrastructure that are reliable and that work 24/7? Also bigger organizations had to face the situation that they had to have employees working from their homes. How do I support these infrastructures? How can I be sure that people are able to be on calls and then calls on drop? How can this structure be safe? We all knew about this case some months ago of a company that was attacked by criminals. And the reason why it happened was because of a breach caused by an employee. The employee knew that it wasn't the reason why this was happening, but this is the kind of things that companies are facing nowadays. So cybercrime will increase for sure, and they will rely much more on the infrastructure. Either we are someone coming to the internet for the first time, either we are becoming now more digital, maybe shopping online, using home banking, etc., or because we are an organization that will need to rely more on digital. And the same thing happens with governments. So that's actually what we want to cover on this panel. And if you think about it, it's how do we use technology, advanced technology, to make it easier and better and safer for consumers, for companies, and also, of course, for countries to operate in this world. So I will start with Katharina and ask her what's her take, what she's doing, and how is she contributing to this new world, and safer world that we are now living in.
Thank you.
So I'm Kat Sommer, I'm the Head of Strategy and Public Affairs for NCC Group, which is a large UK-based but globally operating cyber security company. I think Holly mentioned the integrated review and the national cyber strategy earlier. What those do is they set out very clearly that gaining and keeping a cutting edge in cyber is a core element of strategic technology advantage. Which, is a great ambition. I love the ambition. It's very sort of, hell yes, we're going to do this. It also makes it very clear that to achieve that ambition, we do need a whole of society approach. I would add that we also need that shared sense of purpose and that shared sense of mission that drives that whole of society effort. And I was thinking about turning that ambition into reality, and I think we are coming up against three dilemmas as we think about the practical implementation of that. The first one is that clarity versus adaptability dilemma. So if we want a strategic technology advantage, we need to know in which technologies. We need to know which are the technologies of the future. The National Cyber Strategy sets out 6 technology areas, which is already quite a number to contend with. If you then look across a whole range of other strategies the UK government has published, you come up with up to 30 different technologies. So you've got AI, you've got quantum, we talk about that quite often, add to that space, synthetic biology, and it becomes a massively complex landscape to navigate. If we can't even find that consensus now, how are we going to deal with how perception changes of what is considered a critical technology or not, as we watch what other countries and other actors are doing, and as the great unknowns evolve in the macro environment. So the question really is, how do we create an open and transparent dialogue to find that initial consensus of the technology that we want to focus on, but then also agree as a whole of society when and if that changes, and how do we communicate that so that we have clarity of vision rather than the fragmented approach that also dissects the effort. The second dilemma is the national advantage versus international collaboration. And Ahmed touched on that earlier, was very open in saying ultimately this is about how this serves us as much as how it serves others. And bear with me while I elaborate on this matter, but I've been thinking about a race in track cycling called the block pursuit. And what it does is that you've got 2 teams starting on the track, they compete against each other, but only the team that crosses the finish line first can score points. So there's a very clear incentive for the riders of that team to work together to beat the other team. But then ultimately when they cross the finish line, there can only be one winner. So once they know they're going to win, they'll compete within their team to be first. And it creates a really interesting racing dynamic. And the metaverse stretched it a little bit because I think ultimately neither the UK nor Portugal will want to actively compete against each other where there are shared values and like-minded approaches. But the question that sort of comes up is, in an environment where we have that block pursuit competitive dynamic, how can we still create trusted relationships for a shared purpose and a shared goal? And the third dilemma is a very classic one, it's the innovation versus regulation one. So what the various strategies do is that they talk about the need to operationalize and commercialize innovation, but they also talk about the need to embed security by design into those emerging technologies. And as someone who's been quite actively advocating to embed security into emerging technologies for the past 5 or so years, I love that is happening. It's great, but I think the challenge that we still have is that security element is seen not as an enabler, but still as a barrier and an obstacle to innovation. So the question that arises is, how do we get to a point where maybe not even a secure by design, but a resilient by design approach is embedded into emerging technologies, and that is seen as something that drives future technologies and drives forward thinking rather than stops it. What I realise I've done is thrown out a lot of questions rather than giving you a lot of answers. But in my defence, I don't think they are questions that any single person can answer on their own. But I think in society dialogue to find the answers to those questions will help us create that shared sense of purpose and that shared sense of mission that we need to turn our ambitions into reality.
Thank you, Kat. Now to David, he's from Clarinet, a technology company providing managed service, cloud, etc. So how are you helping companies in facing these challenges that we've been talking about?
Okay. So first of all, Clarinet, we have a broader approach than most of the companies, because for sure we are in the cloud, we provide technology, we provide data, we work with vendors, we work with all the hyperscalers, which none of them are in Europe. It's a problem. It's a concern to us, so we also develop our private cloud so that we can ensure our clients that their data, their processes are renewed and controlled and they can see it. In Clarinet, we think that cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. Companies have to identify and protect the data, but they have to remain competitive, fast, adopting new technologies, and implementing cybersecurity controls in a way that the day-to-day use of that technology to their users, to their clients, are fit itself. And that is hard to do. That is the really differentiation. I cannot obligate my users all day long to do multi-factor authentication and to change networks and redo multi-factor authentication. Because if I do that, they are going to find other ways to work and we are going to work in what we call the shared IT. And this is the last thing that we want to address. Just, I want to address the last big attack that occurred in Portugal. They weren't the first. They weren't the biggest. But they have one thing in common. They impacted companies, for sure, but they impacted the end user. And that is what was very different. You were talking about the television, about the cyber attacks, and your mother told me. I said, they are talking about cybersecurity in television. That is, it was wrong, isn't it? Okay, my mother understands what I'm doing now. So that was a good result of having more public information about the cyber attacks. So helping companies, we have to address them, to dispute the world. I can say that cybersecurity is not only about technology. Okay, lots of times we work with vendors for sure, but cybersecurity isn't just a box that I put on my network and all is okay from that. Cybersecurity is a process, and we want to show our clients that they have to work in our products, to understand the risk. For sure, they need technology, but they have to do security awareness training for their users, and the security and the way that we bring the users to this kind of questions is that we explain to them that we are protecting our company, but also protecting our life. As we said, our digital presence will be our digital identity for sure. So it's a challenge because the shorter part or the easiest part is to buy something, install a network quickly, and cybersecurity is different from that. It is now taking cybersecurity.
Thank you, David. Now we're going to, it was very clear during the pandemic that a lot of people started to interact with public services, but especially public service related to healthcare. And healthcare is going to be, if not today, it's going to be one of the most relevant areas where digital, especially because of privacy, and especially because of consumers. This is going to be something which is going to be really relevant. I'm now going to give the floor to Luís Antunes from the University of Porto. He's a professor director of the Competence Center of Cybersecurity and Privacy, and also a member of the Scientific Council and also of the Electronic Administration. He's expert in digital health. So I'm going to, I don't know if it was completely the focus digital health, but I think there's something that is interesting and different maybe from the rest of the members of the panel. So I'm going to give you the floor and ask you if you could speak a little bit specifically about this also.
Thank you, Shane. I want to thank the British Embassy, Mr. Ambassador, for this opportunity to talk in this meeting. And I think it's quite important because I think that we live in an era where we will need and we already need some shared sovereignty, because by individual we cannot win this war that we are having nowadays in the cyberspace. So it's quite important to have this meeting with people and other countries and try to see where we can share experience and where we can share technology. So regarding your comment, Ocean, I will address the healthcare. I was planning to address it by the end of my talk. So I want to start with Ocean was motivating this group with the COVID and what's happening during the COVID, where all of us were at home. And my first question is, most of the board of directors of big companies, most of the government, they were at home. What kind of technology did we use for talk with each other? To visit, to video conferencing with each other? And where are the companies that are controlling this technology? So either we use the phone by itself, or we use WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal. Which one of these are European? Teams, Zoom, so you can choose it. Cisco, WebEx, which of them are European? And I think that most of us know the answer. So at the University of Porto, with the National Security Cabinet, a few years ago, we started to work on the app where, so since we do not control the stack of the technology of smartphones, the last step where we can add some value is in the software. So we start a spin-off from the University of Porto, where we are developing a hub that can cipher end-to-end the communication, the text messages, and this is added by Castro Bairro. I was one of the founders. And the thing that we are promoting for the future is quantum technology. So let's imagine that quantum computing is there, that Catherine is going to talk about this, and we are already preparing this new era where quantum computing is a reality and we need software to deal with this and to keep our communication secure. One other issue is that most of the European countries, they are going this path. They are building these apps by themselves, have their own companies, and we will reach a point where we need to interoperate all of these apps, because the Prime Minister of Portugal needs to talk with the Prime Minister of the UK, and if the app is not interoperable, they will not be able to talk in a secure manner. So we are building this notion of cloud of users and the cloud of clouds. So to be able to interoperate this kind of technology with friendly countries. So, and once we talk about clouds, and this is my second take, Rolando Martins that is here, it's my colleague from the University of Porto. So we are working on this notion of federated clouds. And there is this European project that is leveraging this it's Gaia X. Gaia is a city in Portugal. The project is not based on this city, but the idea is to have a cloud of clouds again. So to have this federation where Portugal can have its node of this cloud system, the UK can have a node of the cloud system, and on top of this, we are planning as Europe to have the data spaces. So there is this proposal nowadays that is under public consultation on the European health data space, which is interesting, and all of us should be involved in these consultancy. So on top of this, what we are doing, we have two big projects, both of them led by Rolando. We are trying to build this notion of edge clouds. So let's put my mobile phone on this cloud computing power and makes the edge, my mobile phone, part of this ecosystem. So we are working on this, and based on this notion, we are finishing a project that is, instead of smart cities, everyone is talking about smart cities, but I think that the base goal is safe cities. We need safe cities before we have smart cities. Otherwise, we are escalating the problem. So we are working on this notion of safe cities, trying to leverage technology to keep our cities safe. And this new project that we have now, trying to leverage again the same kind of technology, it's autonomous driving. So I think it will be a reality in the near future, autonomous driving. And I have a question that it was my philosophy, that is the following. Let's imagine in autonomous driving that we have two cars, and a tree falls, and they are going to bump. And if they bump in the given angle, the driver of the first car is dying. And if they bump in the different angle, the driver of the second car is going to die. Who is going to cause what kind of angle the cars will bump? I think it should be the whole of society. We all, as a society, should be part of this decision. If I was asked to cause a solution, I would have quite difficult to implement any of these solutions. My take is the following. If we leave these questions to the big tech companies, and then of course they have these profit purposes. So I can only joke that they will use big data trying to evaluate the time that I have until my death, and then they will start the bidding process to insurance companies trying to see which one is going to be the best. I'm just joking, but this can happen. And I think we should not allow this to happen. So, and the last thing that I want to talk is about data, about fundamental rights. Because I think that during the process of this digital transformation, we forgot that our grandparents, our parents fought a lot for fundamental rights. And during this process, it seems like, oh, okay, it's not important anymore. They are important. We were able to put a rover in Mars, so we should be able to build technology to reinforce the fundamental rights in the digital world. We should not give up of the fundamental rights. We should be challenged to develop technology to reinforce these kind of rights, these kind of values that we have as a society. So the last project that I want to talk, 2 years ago I was invited to become the data protection officer of the Portuguese data protection authority. So you may imagine that I really like privacy and data protection. And the point is that the value of the data is huge. So under the perspective of the EU on the data strategy, the numbers are enormous. So its perspective is to the value of this economy in 2025, it's going to be around 829 billion euros. So either those who like data protection and these fundamental rights get involved and try to develop technology to allow this value to become a reality with the fundamental rights in line, or we will lose this game because the volume is too high and we will lose the game. So I start to research a bit about this, and again, I think we have a model aligned with the data protection authority and also with the national security offices, where the data never leaves the institutions, the hospitals, for example, and we have Hospital São João, the second largest hospital in Portugal with us. And we implement this model of questions and answers. So the market can make a question, and the hospital can give the answer once the answer cannot re-identify any of the data subjects. So, and I think that this is possible, and we are strongly work on this approach, so we can make this value a reality, but aligned with the fundamental rights. So
Thank you so much. We are now going to give the floor to Keith. Sorry, I have to go through my notes. Professor Keith Martin from the Royal Holloway University of London. He also not only is a professor and a researcher, but is also the author of 2 books, Everyday Cryptography, and also Cryptography, the Key for Digital Security, How It Works and Why It Matters. So this has been your area of expertise, and we would really like to have your take on the subject that we've been discussing here and how they intersect with your area of expertise.
Thank you, bon dia. I promise no cryptography. So I am going to reflect a little bit on what I think is pillar 1 of the UK cyber strategy, which includes 2 key things for us as a university. It's developing people and skills, but also deepening the partnerships between government initiatives, academia, and industry, which is very relevant to today. What the embassy asked me to do was reflect, so not put the big questions out, I'm going to reflect on some of the things that have happened and comment a little bit on how successful they have been. And this is really since the initial UK cybersecurity strategy, 2009? Something like that, thank you. So about 13 years ago. So I'm just going to run through some of these initiatives and comment on them from the perspective of the higher education sector. I'm going to stick to the rule of 3, like so many of my speakers have done. This will test the efficacy of my intervention. Will be whether you can remember what my 3 things are. Okay. So the first one is very simple. Badges work. Badges really work. So one of the first things that happened in the UK after the first cybersecurity strategy was launched was they started certifying degree programs. This was really looking around the UK at degree programs that were running and essentially giving a badge if that degree program contained suitable material that was being delivered by suitable expertise. And so this was the first intervention. The second one was what's called academic centres of excellence in cyber security research. So this was another badge which was really recognising whether a university had a critical mass of cybersecurity researchers. It was doing the right kind of cybersecurity research, however you define that, but also was signalling to the wider world that these were places you could go for suitable expertise. So these were the first 2 badge schemes that they launched. Now I'm going to make a very, it may sound like an arrogant statement, but I think it's actually meant in all honesty. Had that scheme, had these badges been awarded in probably 2004, 2005, my university, Royal Holloway University of London, would have been the only university that would have had a certified degree and the only university which would have been an ACE CSR. We're now in 2022, and I believe, well, there are so many certified degree programs, I don't even know how many there are, probably 30. There are 19 academic centres of excellence in cyber security research. Now, if that doesn't prove to you that badges don't work, they really do work, and it seems to provide an incredible incentive for universities and vice-chancellors particularly to drive through initiatives. So, from a Royal Holloway perspective, this scheme has been a disaster because we were kings of the castle and now we're in a big ecosystem. But I think that's successful. Okay. The second area is really echoing your point about this is not just about technology. And I think everybody in this room understands that. Right? This is not about technology alone. This is about technology and the society using that technology. But the thing is, I think a nudge is required because I think a lot of people don't realise that. And I think even though we all think we're telling people that, that isn't always received particularly well. And so I think nudges are required. So there are a few nudges in the UK. There were research institutes founded. There were 4 in the end founded, and these were designed to cluster and develop cybersecurity research in areas where it was felt the UK was a little bit lacking. And significantly, the first one that was founded was on socio-technical cybersecurity research. So this was about really encouraging this link up between technology and broader societal issues, which we heard mentioned in the earlier. So that's the first thing. Second thing was the development of a cybersecurity body of knowledge. Sorry, another acronym coming, CyBOC. So that has been an ongoing partnership between the universities and mainly the private sector to develop bodies of knowledge in knowledge areas. Essentially to say, what is cybersecurity? I remember when all this first started, GCHQ used to have a pie chart they put up on slides that said, this is our vision of cybersecurity. I don't think anyone in this room would have recognised or agreed with the pie chart. But the cybersecurity body of knowledge is meant to be much more representative, and there are as many sectors there that are non-technical as technical, although but personally I think Cyborg has got a bit of work still to do on the societal sides of that, but that's been a big initiative. The third one, and closest to my heart in that second category, is the development of centres of doctoral training in cybersecurity. So we have one at Royal Holloway, one of 3 in the UK at the moment. And the point of these is these are PhD programmes, 10 scholarships a year awarded, the whole idea of this is that all the students go through a first core year of training, general cybersecurity training, before they go on to do their research. Our centre will be recruiting mathematicians, computer scientists to do cryptography, I just mentioned it for you, but also international relations experts, psychologists, and sociologists. We bring them together, we put them all through that training year, but most importantly they learn from each other. So they also get to see cybersecurity through the eyes of very different backgrounds and perspectives. And proof of the pudding, I think this works, is that one of the first students funded through this doctoral training centre programme, launching in 2011, was one of the architects of the UK cyber strategy and provided input. So one of our graduates went into government and was one of the writers of this strategy. So I like that somewhat cyclic part of that process. So that's the second one really. It's definitely not just a technology problem. And the third one really is we're all in this together. We really are all in this together. And the initiative I think that most reflects that from the UK government has been yet another badge, academic centres of excellence in cybersecurity education. But this is not what you probably think it is, because the certified degree programmes, what badges degree programmes, to be an ACSE in the UK, you have to do a couple of other things which are a little bit harder to achieve. The hardest one of all is that you have to have a dialogue with your own institutional cybersecurity professionals to try and make sure the campus itself is secure. And that is obviously part of critical national infrastructure in the higher education sector. And so we have to have a dialogue with the people governing our cybersecurity to make sure the university is secure as it can be. But also, the universities are expected to engage with the wider community. They're supposed to go out and engage in knowledge transfer. They're supposed to go out and take initiatives to take this whole society approach, actually, and because we're all in this together. An example of that that's running right at the moment, I think, at Royal Holloway is we're running a Cyber First course this week. It's a residential programme for school children. That's another government initiative in the UK promoting and highlighting cybersecurity to school children. So a CSE would be expected not only to help secure their institution, but also run things like Cyber First programmes. So that's a quick tour of the initiatives that have been underway. There are 10 academic centres of excellence in cybersecurity education. I think I mentioned 19 ACSR, so I think that's a success. I think that capacity building has been very successful. So just to remind you, people do like badges, do capacity building, give them badges, they'll do anything for a badge. Secondly, it's not a technology alone problem, but we might have to nudge to get people to be aware of that. And then obviously we are all in this together, very much the theme of today. Thank you, Dr.
Thanks so much, Keith. We have a very diverse panel. Now I'm going to give the floor to Katarina Basch. She's a graduate in physics, astronomy, and also mathematics. But she is now working in this company called Daimos Engineering, and she's responsible for defense projects, which I think that is in all of our minds, especially now that we're facing this war in Europe. And of course it correlates to everything that we've been talking. So I'll give you the floor now.
Thank you, Ocean. Thank you, first of all, for the UK Embassy for this invitation to be in this panel talking. I will take the opportunity for talking about some initiative here in Portugal and that has been coordinated from my company. So Daimos is basically a company in the space sector, but recently we have been quite worried about this defense project. So, we built this new area on the secure communications based on these quantum technologies. That is something that is emerging now. So this was a challenge. Like 2 years ago, we came to the national security area in Portugal saying that we really would like to experiment these kind of things. We have a community here in Portugal developing a lot of research on this. Research centers like in Aveiro actually developing QTD nodes, cipher machines that are being developing also in the UNESCO and the Institute Superior Technique. And this kind of community could be used to develop something very useful for the European defense and for the Portuguese defense. And this was the challenge. So we applied for this program, European program, and discretion as foreign, basically. So discretion is a project that will be developing a software-defined network for the European defense based on these quantum distribution needs. Nowadays, we know that a lot of emerging technologies like quantum computing, this could be actually a threat to our cryptography and to our needs to authenticate and digital signatures and so on. And so there's new technology coming also to prevent this. And the idea here is to take this kind of community, so the research institutes, industry, and also the super users, which is our national security cabinet and our Portuguese defense and government, that it's actually going through this roadmap, implementing these kind of networks here in Portugal. This is also related with another initiatives coming in Portugal, like the Cyber Academy and Innovation Hub that we have also here to promote the training on this kind of issues, cyber security, new technologies that could help actually this whole area about cyber security. And in this sense, we also want so our national security cabinet thinks that it's quite important to develop this kind of technologies, using the knowledge that we have, the sovereignty for our technology. But we also have colleagues from other experiments in Europe running already, like for instance in Madrid, we have the quantum network running already, so they are working with us in our initiative, also the colleagues from Austria with a lot of experience on this. And so this is the first project now running to develop these prototypes and to start this network. And we are actually now in the process of knowing if we are actually trying to build the first segment of the Portuguese quantum network here, related with the European initiative, EuroQCI. So this is a big initiative in Europe, just trying to go also with the case of the Chinese that are already really advanced in this. And this initiative is an initiative to build an infrastructure to securely connect governments, energy grids, critical infrastructures in Europe. And then they could safeguard sensitive data and critical infrastructures integrating these quantum systems. That the particularity here is two parties want to communicate with each other, but if someone is intercepting this communication, they will know that someone is intercepting due to the properties of these kind of systems. And the idea that I want to pass here is that actually here there is a national strategy to cope with this, starting from the part of the defense and governmental side, but I hope in the next years with this kind of European initiatives in Europe, we can actually pass this to the society and to the civil infrastructures also to help raise the security in the communications and also in the networks.
Thank you so much, Caterina. Before I give the opportunity to the audience to ask some questions to you, I just want to ask you, and I kind of ask you to do it in kind of a tweet mode, very quickly. One of the key themes of our panel was digital competencies. And I think that we've somehow touched on every aspect of your of what you've given us as some of the examples. But I wanted to focus a little bit more on the fact that we have still very big gaps in our society, from the citizens that are now starting to using the internet. People that use the internet in a very basic way, and now I've been asking to use home banking, shopping online. And also the fact that we have a big part of the population which are very sophisticated, especially the younger population, which they believe that, you know, if I have a big benefit, I don't mind giving my rights away. And as we move along, we will feel that these impacts are going to grow. The other thing is regarding companies. We're feeling that there's a lot of a need for the development of digital competencies, not only the employees, but also the managers. Also public entities. So I would like to have your take on what you believe, especially coming from the UK, what are the experiences that you feel are going to be really relevant, and some examples of things that are really relevant for the development of digital competencies.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief. I'll speak from the experience of NCC Group and what we've been doing, because we have lots of very clever technical people who understand cyber in and out. And what we've been doing is working with an organisation called the Small Charities Coalition in the UK that represents a lot of very small charities, often run by people who aren't necessarily digital natives. So we've taken our technical experts and put them in front of those small charities to just educate them on the basics of cybersecurity. And I think it's been a really interesting two-way education, really, because the technical experts deal with things like cryptography and quantum communication and quantum safe encryption. So they forget that the person on the Clapham omnibus, or the everyday person, doesn't necessarily even understand what a password manager is, or has questions like, what does a secure password look like, or can I actually use the Google Suite services and that keeps my communication or my emails secure. So we've been doing a lot of that education. I think it is, speaking of the whole of society approach, it's the responsibility of people who do have those capabilities to pass them on and find organisations that are trusted within existing communities to use them as then trainers and multipliers. So I think a lot of the charities that we've helped with very practical questions on how they keep themselves safe and secure are now able to speak to their beneficiaries and their users and pass on those very brief nuggets of knowledge and information that we've been able to share.
For sure, we have two kinds of approach, and in Portugal we have most of the times I said we have two kinds of companies, and Portugal has two speeds. Okay, for sure we have lots of small companies. Okay, how to address with them and explain to them what they have to do in cybersecurity. Net we have developed a cybersecurity framework, and no, we don't reinvent the wheel. We use the best referentials, ISO 27001, C cybersecurity controls, lists, but we present them in a way that the small company can understand what we are talking about. We digest that, and we do a roadmap of cybersecurity implementations, tests that they have to do. We explain that they have to test their systems, they have to test their people, they have to test the technology, they have to produce documentation that in the manner that they can understand. So this is one of the approaches to do. So talking about the C-level, I think for sure is a gap, but also is a gap of communication. And most of the time is our fault. We have to talk the language that the business understands. I cannot go to a business meeting with a C-level or a commercial meeting and talk in the way that we are talking here, because most of these concepts are alien to them. What do C-level understand? The loss of business, money. I have to talk about money with them. I have to explain that I'm not just investing. Imagine that. I'm presenting a cybersecurity problem that is costing money. And someone asks me, okay, how much business is that investment is going to bring to me? I'm going to be able to explain them? No, I'm not going to bring you more business, but I will be protecting your business. I will be protecting the way that you work, your company, your data, your client information. Okay? So for me, it's so important that we understand that lots of times is a lack of communication and is our fault. We have to explain these concepts in the way that the business has to understand it. Okay.
To answer, to be quick, but with an example. So my answer will be people, awareness. The example. So here in Portugal during the pandemic, in the restaurants, if you want to get the menu, you have your QR code, you point to your mobile, and you get the menu. how many of us did use this approach? Yeah, okay. So, some weeks ago I was giving a talk at the Institute National Institute for Defense. And at the end of my talk, I had the QR code and told the students, if you want to get the presentation, you just point to the QR code and you will get the presentation. And they got the symbol of SC Porto, go Porto in Lisbon, which is funny. So you never know. You trust that the QR code is giving you what you are willing to get, but you are trusting. And you should not trust. Okay, this is it. People, awareness.
Right, I'm going to twist that slightly. I think it's awareness of people. And I think people have talked about awareness as being the first level of these maturity models, but I'm not sure we, sort of designers, policymakers, whatever, are aware of how people use technology. And I think the biggest thing we need to do in response to your first question is really develop a much better understanding of how, through research, of course, from a research organisation, of how people consume technology and how they use that. And I will also just give you an example, really just to sort of maybe show the power of this. So this is from a colleague of mine, Lizzie Phillips-Camp, who was involved in a project up in the northeast of England where they were working in marginalised communities. And I think you really brought up this importance of us considering marginalised communities, particularly during the pandemic. So she was looking at, the council that she was working for wanted to know how they could roll out council services, provide benefits essentially to people in that community, the people who needed the most. And a typical, this society was a very matriarchal society. Men were nowhere to be seen in this society. And the typical person they were trying to target was most likely going to be a single mother, probably in her 20s, trying to wrestle with technology and get these benefits using these digital services that the council wanted to roll out. But when the researchers went into that community to try and find out how best to do this, the council's assumption was that they were imagining this 20-something-year-old single mother and designing the services for her. But that was not the reality, because she's holding down 3 part-time jobs. She's never in the house. She's just not there. She's not in that house. The person who makes all the social decisions in that house is her mother, who is absolutely not technology aware, but is the decision maker in that household. So that's the person that makes the decision. So the user is not there, the decision maker is not familiar with technology. And I'll leave you to think about who the system administrators in these houses are and how old they might be. And that is exactly the issue you've got. So when you think about people, and awareness, you've got to be aware who the people are, and in this case, the person you're trying to target is not the person you need to be considering. It's a much more complicated problem, and I think it's on all of us to get our heads around this in much greater detail. So that would really be my response to your first question.
Well, yes, most of the things of course now, but I believe the same thing. So we are developing fancy and advanced technology to prevent a lot of attacks and a lot of things. We have to get to the people, to the users, to the people now that are using the internet, using these kind of digital things, and make them understand the risks they are actually running with this kind of technology. And I believe this is about training, about prevention, about actions to people be aware of this kind of problems, and this has to be more. So we had some television news about the attacks, the big attacks in Portugal and so on, and that's how I started to talk about cybersecurity, but this needs to be more so with the people. So talking with them, explain them the risks, explain how they can prevent this, and I think this is the important thing.
Thank you so much to you all. Let me give the opportunity for people to ask some questions. So now it's your time. Yeah, do we have a microphone? Just state your name and organization.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Johannes. I work at the airport, the airport. It's been a pleasure to listen to such good presentations and insights. But I do have a question. I'm really proud to be a Portuguese citizen in an age where I see companies looking and trying to work in 5G. And I was really interested about Katerina Bastu's presentation, because she was talking about the concept that is very important for us in cyber, which is software-defined networks. Why is it important? Because it's going to be a pain. It's going to be really hard because it will, of course, increase cybersecurity risk. Basically because we need to know, and this is my question to the whole panel, but of course more directed to Katerina, is how are you going to tackle, what is your strategy to tackle the tools and processes that are needed to ensure software integrity, the reliability to identify and keep track of changes to this software, the status updates of security patches for these softwares, when we're talking about these 5G networks. How are we going to tackle compliance with 3GPP standards, for example? So this is, for us, a huge concern. We are, of course, in favor of moving towards the latest technologies, but the more we introduce these concepts, like software-defined networks, which are indeed necessary, will bring a lot of benefits. We need also to make sure our security environment can respond to this in an effective and efficient way. Also efficiency, because like our colleague from Ireland says, because we're talking about how much we need to invest to run this efficiently. So this is my question, how we are going to tackle, how is security going to keep this pace?
Thank you. You actually did a lot of difficult questions. Some of them we are actually having a lot of discussion in the project. The idea of having the software-defined network was basically for not only for the flexibility, the way you can run the network, and I'm not a specialist of that, but because it's actually a dual benefit for the quantum part. So it's easier to implement the quantum part in the network using this kind of technology. The thing is, it's already complicated to think about the security of this because we have now a control panel and of course it will be easier to attack, but imagine now that we need to use this in a military network. And this is the really challenge thing that we have in our hands. And for now we are basically studying how we can do this. We are using these cipher machines, so these hardware models in the network, just to try to have more security in the process, but still a lot of discussion on this. But we're also very worried about the standards, and this is how Anita is coming to the project, so they are actually have the challenge to figure out if there are some standards for this, or if we can extend these standards for these new networks, and it's more at least flexible and manageable, but also more secure for the civil part, actually for in our case the defense part. But I would say that you have to keep it the project because now we are in the phase of the study and actually discussing these matters. Maybe in 1 year we will have some more answers for this. I don't know if you want to talk.
Yeah, I can say something quickly. No, I'm software-defined networks. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on that. Apologies for anyone here who was at a talk I gave in Portugal about a month ago, where I talked about this, but I think it's relevant to your question, which is that I was talking about cryptography then. But there's a need for the system-wide view. I think what we made mistakes with the technology before is we have specialists who think about the technology, but they don't think that it's going to go into a system. So in the case of cryptography, there are experts who design mathematical algorithms, but then they don't think about the complexities of implementation. And then they don't think about the complexities of managing the key material, which of course drives it, and then they don't think about the complexities of the endpoints, which is exactly where all this stuff actually gets used. And so one of the things I would always be saying to our students, but also to anyone I'm speaking to, is they need to take that system-wide view. Something engineers are very good at, but many other disciplines we're less good at. And so I'm sure, without being an expert on software-defined networks, I still feel that system-wide view is going to be critical there as well, as it would be for any technology.
I will never jump in. Totally agree with you. So my advice would be, if I had a powerful money to address this issue, and I think you won't, I would try to identify the key components of the software-defined networks, and crypto is one of the key components of the software-defined network, and to use formal verification that the implementation that you have really addresses the protocol that was defined by the mathematicians, because the problem is in the translation from the protocol that is out to the implementation that most of the times when you use pseudorandomness, for example, the randomness is not there. So the PlayStation 4, the random was 4 and 4 and 4 and 4. Okay, so I will use the formal verification for the models where you believe that they are the key point of the implementation. And then it's a matter of trust of those who have the skill to code the protocol. So you need to trust them. Of course, you have tests that you can do before you go to live with these software-defined networks that are done. But still, at the end, it's a matter of trust. The risk is not always. As you have the risk of crossing the road, so we get used to manage risk.
In the end of the day, you will have to invest and to find solution for someone. We don't have the capabilities to develop it from the ground up. What I would say to you is to choose the solution from a company that is certified for national state friendly of our values, because most of these tests are done because they use this kind of technology in the military and they are certified so that. For me, that if that is a concern for you, I will start there. Okay? But we also have to understand that if we don't implement software-defined networks, what is the alternative? Point-to-point networks? The solution is way worse and we have less control. Okay? So it's a problem. We have all these tools, products, to address this, and the way that I see this is used to products that have been certified with conditions that our friends have implemented in the military, for example.
Just something. So we are getting used to the impact assessment. So from the GDPR, it's mandatory to have the privacy impact assessment for new technologies. I think the AI will make mandatory again the impact assessment of AI algorithms. And I think that this way of adopting new technology based on the impact assessment, it's quite important. The point is the competencies that the companies as a whole have to perform a good impact assessment.
I'll just very briefly expand Keith's point, because I think it's not just a whole of system view that's needed, but a whole of society approach. Because we can talk about the security implications of software-defined networks and find technical solutions, and then we need to talk to the regulators and the policymakers to embed those standards into rules, and we need to talk to people who are enforcing those rules so they understand what they're looking for and what they're doing to drive adoption of those standards. So I think going back to earlier comments around cyber being a team sport and the multidisciplinary approach being needed, I think that's quite a good example of how that should all come together in the end.
Well, we have time for one more. Okay, great. Where? Oh, there. Can we have a microphone, please? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to add on to the question that João asked. In the consortium that is developing this program, we have a member of the consortium that is actually the spin-off of the University of Portugal that is really in the business of certifying and testing the system. Of course, this is just a mitigation, but just to tell you that we have thought about it when we have created the consortium. I have a question, if I may. You talked about awareness. And quite honestly, I'm a little bit tired of listening to that word, awareness. I think we have to go a notch up or 2 notches up instead of creating awareness, you don't create awareness to those that learn how to drive cars, and cars are weapons. You ask them, they are weapons if they are misused, of course. We ask them, we demand them from them that they have to pass an exam in order for them to drive a car. And even though they have accidents and they kill people. So, I think we, as a society, must demand more from those that have responsibility, public responsibilities on the society as far as cyber is concerned, and demand and require competences to be developed instead of just awareness. Because if we still, and we keep on asking or telling that we have to raise awareness, we will never evolve to the correct level of maturity. This is my opinion, but I would like, of course, to know your opinion on this one.
And I think that does raise another really interesting question around who is responsible and for what, which is why I think this idea of a secure by design approach is taking hold. And the way it was explained to me at the very beginning in the UK was a while back people were electrocuted because they were touching plugs. And you were telling people, please don't touch the plugs, and obviously people didn't listen, so they still died because they were being electrocuted. Until there was a requirement for the manufacturers of the plugs to put in safety restrictions so that even if people touched the plugs, they wouldn't be electrocuted. And I think that is quite a nice, it has flaws, the analogy, but it's quite a nice example of where you put responsibility. So at what point do you say we're going to remove that burden of being aware and doing the right thing from the average citizen and the average consumer, and put it on the manufacturers of devices, or put it on organizations with greater resources and greater capabilities to be doing those things, and then put in place the legal requirements and sanctions that come with not adhering to those responsibilities.
First of all, thank you for the question. It's very interesting, and the way that this point is quite to the point, and I totally agree with you what you're saying. And really, we talk about security awareness, but we should be talking about a security awareness training program with the company to explain it better. How I think possibly the company should address it is they should, from the start, to train their users, for sure. Expose them to good quality content, not just sliding information that will not pass. Will all be there. The content has to have quality. To be straight to the point and to explain to our users that we are protecting the company, but we are also protecting their lives. Okay? Because the concept that is needed to protect our company is needed also to protect their personal life. Multi-factor authentication is important to the company. It's important to protect our at least our social media presence. Okay? First, train the people. Second, test. And test, you should test to components. Test users. You must develop phishing simulations using the same tools that the cybersecurity criminal would use. Clone the company domain, clone the company interface, and phish users. Just that we can see if the training is being effective or not, and pass that information. And the third component, and really I don't see it implemented, is test the technology. The technology must be there to protect the user. For sure, if a user receives a phishing email, it should be able to identify that, report it, and this is very important. I have to create an invited to my company, if someone in the factory falls victim of a phishing attack, they have to be sufficiently comfortable to talk with me and explain to them what happened so that the company can help them. We find the password, okay, it's very important. But we have to test the technology. I've tested people, I informed them that I have to ensure that the protections that I have in my systems deliver the less amount possible of malware and phishing in the mailbox of the user. And this is hard to do. We do it. I don't see many companies implementing this way, but I agree. Train the people, test the people, explain them that it's important. Let's also test the system. Okay? And we do it. And if someone enters the company when they are making the onboard, they also have to be to onboard in cybersecurity and pass a test. And the test will be information for if I am an attacker, should I talk to? Okay?
Okay, so I really enjoyed your secretary, so privacy by design and security by design of the systems. The point is that I don't believe that it will happen in the near future. And the reason why it won't happen is that due to the lack of engineers. And as the number of engineers is so small given the demand, so we are training people half a semester, and we are putting them to code. And this is strange for me. So I have a daughter, she is studying piano since she was 6. She is now 18 and she plays beautiful pieces of piano. I can be trained to play piano for 6 months. I can play some pieces, but I will not play as good as she does. And for coding, it's the same thing. If you train someone for coding, if he does a degree, so in most of the cases, he has the competencies to be aware of security and privacy issues on the design. But if we are using people that we train for 6 months or a year to code, then, sorry, shit happens, for sure. So, as this is the last intervention that I have, and there are some policy makers here, I would like to give awareness for the following fact that we have in Europe. So, Almirante remarks typically in a presentation, we have a slide with 5 browsers, and he asks, we know to which region each of these browsers belong, and all of them belong to US companies. And my main criticism for Europe is that the first browser was introduced in CERN in Europe. The point is that we don't have this tradition to scale up technology until we give to the market. So in Europe, we have this lack of scale-up companies, and most of the Portuguese companies that need to scale up, they go to the US. And we should stop this flooding, otherwise, again, we will lose this thing.
Okay, I'm supposed to agree with you because you're very important, and I do agree with some aspects you said, but I don't agree with you overall, because I think everything begins with awareness, and I think obviously when I said awareness, people, about 5 minutes ago, this would be an awareness of us to be aware of the problems that we're facing. But I also think in a society at large, there are a lot of people who are not aware, so we have to begin with awareness. And we can see this, there are certain inbuilt security threats that we can all understand. I mean, I think even a 3-year-old child faced with a lion running down the street runs and tries to climb a tree. But certainly in the UK, we still put students through awareness of traffic hazards when they're in school, because this kind of level of security threat is not understood. People have to be made aware. And that's also true in cybersecurity as well. So schools trying to bring this through. But I would love to get to a point, and maybe we will when seminars like this don't feature this word cyber. I mean, it's interesting that the UK has gone from cybersecurity proudly championing cyber. But actually there is a school of thought that says the sooner that word disappears the better, because actually the ideal place we want to get is when our notion of security inherently understands the threat from digital technologies. But we're not anywhere close to that, and I don't see that happening for a while. So So I do see the need for awareness until that moment comes, and that's going to be quite a long time. So in that respect, I do disagree with you.
I'll finish with a comment. I think that we should make some more awareness of the people, because some of the people are actually not aware, but actually we need to responsibilize other people. And we're talking about companies, they should be responsibilized, and they should be the ones responsible for getting the training and the awareness of the people they have in their countries. I think that is it.
Katharina, David, Luís, Keith, Katarina, thank you so much. It was great to spend the last hour with you. And I felt it was a pleasure to be here. I hope that you all enjoyed it. And can I ask you for a round of applause? Someone is asking you to stay in the stage? Oh, leave. Okay, so good. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think the moment has now arrived for us to draw this seminar to a conclusion. And if I may, I'd just like to start by saying a very big thank you to all of our speakers and moderators for what I hope you will agree with me, it's been a truly engaging, fascinating morning of discussion. So how about one more round of applause for all our speakers and moderators? I said at the very beginning that the new bilateral agreement signed between our two Prime Ministers required us to step up our cooperation between our two countries on cyber. I'm very relieved to say that I think we've certainly made a very promising start towards fulfilling